Something has changed about Ukraine's deep strikes. Refineries are still being hit. A campaign designed to strip away the blood of Russia's war machine is still in place. But those strikes are different, more precise. They've become less broad, as Ukraine takes aim not at the refineries themselves, but the vital machinery and components that are incredibly difficult and sometimes impossible for Russia to replace. It's a masterstroke by Ukraine. But Ukraine hasn't done it alone. Ukraine is taking something irreplaceable away from Russia with the help of two other countries, France and the United States. The French-American connection has given Ukraine the step-by-step guide on how to break Russia's balls, and Ukraine is kicking away. Everything hinges on refinery strikes. But if you've been paying attention to Ukraine's deep strike strategy, you know that these types of strikes aren't new to 2026. In fact, 2025 was the breakout year for this particular strategy. Ukraine started hitting Russian oil hard and repeatedly. By the end of the year, a ton of damage had been done. Ukraine had targeted over half of Russia's total refining capacity, conducting strikes against 21 of Russia's 38 largest refineries between January 2025 and the beginning of October of the same year. Successful attacks were on the rise, significant. Ukraine's drones broke through to their targets 48% more in 2025 than they did in 2024. Ukraine managed to shut down about 20% of Russia's refining at one point, and by the end of the year, it had reportedly done more than $13 billion worth of damage to Russia's oil sector. The strategy was good, but it was far from perfect. Ukraine had a problem, and it was rooted in the broad nature of its refinery strikes. In 2025, it was enough for Ukraine to get through Russian air defenses and hit something at a refinery. Anything. Starting fires was the goal, which made the massive storage tanks at these refineries Ukraine's priority targets. One hit from a drone, and a storage tank goes boom, with the fire potentially encompassing more around it. Again, it worked. Refineries were forced to shut down as fires were put out and repair work was underway. Ukraine would even hit refineries several times in quick succession to keep them offline for longer. However, the refineries kept bouncing back. Once the fires were out, storage tanks and buildings weren't all that difficult to replace. Something had to change. Ukraine had to start getting surgical with its strikes. The massive fires at refineries were great for grabbing headlines, but as 2025 rolled into 2026, Ukraine altered its goals. The fires would be a bonus. Ukraine's real aim became to shut down refineries for as long as possible. How would it do that? By striking critical machinery that requires components that are incredibly difficult for Russia to source due to Western sanctions. Another problem reared its head. Ukraine's intelligence is clearly strong enough to enable the nation to carry out refinery strikes, but attacks at this level of precision are far from easy. Ukraine needed help to both identify the targets it should be taking out in Russia's refineries and to ensure its drones could navigate to those targets in the first place. That help has come from two different sources, the United States and France. In an explosive report, the Financial Times has revealed that both American and French intelligence agencies are providing Ukraine with the targeting assistance that it needs to transform its refinery-focused strategy. Fires are no longer the objective. Destroying key machinery at the refineries has become the main goal, and Ukraine is doing it with alarming regularity. Disrupt essential components and the entire war machine grinds to a halt. France's role is a big one. Back in January, French President Emmanuel Macron revealed that France is responsible for providing about 2/3 of the intelligence that Ukraine uses in its war with Russia. Macron even made it a point at the time to note that France had ascended to this role after a year of uncertainty in the relationship between the US and Ukraine. While Ukraine was largely dependent on American intelligence capabilities a year ago, today 2/3 of that intelligence is provided by France. 2/3, Macron declared. That declaration gave the impression that Ukraine was doing everything that it could to move away from US-provided intelligence. It wasn't. Perhaps Macron could have also pointed out that most of the other third of the intelligence Ukraine was receiving, and perhaps more now that the relationship between the US and Ukraine has defrosted in 2026, is coming from the US. And not just any branch of the US. The country's foremost intelligence agency is working directly with Ukraine to ensure that it can carry out its surgical strikes against Russia's refineries. The CIA is in play. And Ukraine is making the most of the agency's help to build an intelligence advantage that Russia can't handle. United 24 media reports that it is often CIA specialists who identify the specific industrial machine that Ukraine needs to strike. There are two conditions attached to this machinery. It either has to be incredibly difficult for Russia to replace, or, failing that, almost impossible for Russia to repair due to its inability to get its hands on the Western components needed. The outlet adds that CIA intelligence has also been crucial to Ukraine's attacks against Russia's Wildberries warehouses. Wildberries, which is often referred to as Russia's version of Amazon, provides an online portal through which Russian entrepreneurs sell and Russian consumers buy. But Wildberries also allows sellers to list military items such as drones and body armor. So it became a target, a big one. With help from the CIA, Ukraine has struck 8 of the company's fulfillment centers, taking out about 860,000 square meters of product-filled industrial space in the process. Just like that, 15.4% of Wildberries' entire storage capacity has been swallowed by fire, costing the company and its sellers billions of dollars. None of this would have been possible without the CIA. Wildberries has since tried to hide military goods from its search results in what amounts to a desperate plea to Ukraine to stop sending its flying sanctions. It isn't going to work. Ukraine knows how important Wildberries is, both as a military supplier and a logistical network inside Russia. With the CIA's help, it's going to keep identifying the company's facilities and striking with flaming fury. Forbes adds that the CIA has been helping Ukraine behind the scenes for a very long time. From the moment that Russia began its campaign of aggression with the illegal annexation of Crimea in 2014, the CIA has been working with Ukrainian intelligence. Institutions that have been weakened by corruption have been rebuilt. The remnants of Russian systems and Soviet-era spying methods have been eliminated. The result is a Ukrainian intelligence service that is as lean and lethal as any other, all backed by 2 of the world's most powerful nations. Right now, France and the US are combining to help Ukraine carry out refinery strikes and other attacks against targets all over Russia. But the CIA has its tendrils in so much more. There have been bombings and covert operations happening inside Russia since the beginning of the full-scale invasion. Key Russian generals and leaders have been taken out. Ukraine doesn't take credit for these attacks, but they are obviously behind them. And behind Ukraine, Forbes says, is the CIA. Everything we're seeing now is the result of more than a decade of collaboration that has been taken to the next level in 2026. Today, France and the United States are helping Ukraine's military planners to chart a course and plan out long-range strikes. But how does it work, and what is the ultimate goal of all this? We're going to reveal all, including the shocking role that Russia itself plays in enabling Ukraine's strikes. But before we do, this is The Military Show. We dig behind the headlines to find the real stories. If you're getting value from our channel, then remember to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you don't miss any of our daily videos. Details about how Ukraine carries out its strikes with the support of France and the US are provided by the Financial Times. The outlet spoke to 2 drone operators who both said that engineers behind the scenes put in a lot of work before a single drone ever leaves the ground. Those engineers select targets based on the intelligence that they receive, along with carrying out detailed technical analyses to map out the route to the target, the logistics involved in the strike, and what purpose the target serves in the broader operational scheme of Ukraine's war against Russia. Once all of this work is done, the engineers brief Ukraine's drone units. This is where energy industry experts come into play, as they will define the specific components that Ukraine's operators need to strike, with a particular focus on which would take Russia the longest to repair or replace. As one of the operators puts it, these experts will tell Ukraine's drone specialists to hit these pipelines here, or this chimney, hit here in this space, or this part of the equipment connection, or this box, and so on. Depots and oil storage units aren't neglected, but they're now secondary in Ukraine's long-range planning. However, these missions aren't planned with a single target in mind. Contingencies are built into everything. If Plan A isn't going to work, perhaps because Russia has moved air defenses into position or the objective that Ukraine wants to strike has been protected in some other way, then there is a Plan B, Plan C, and so on. Multiple objectives are built into every mission to ensure that Ukraine's drones don't make the long journeys only to leave empty-handed at the end of it all. If an operator can't reach their primary target, they divert to pre-selected secondary or tertiary targets. There is no strike abandonment here, only contingency built upon contingency to make sure that damage is done. Ukraine also doesn't ever assume one and done with its long-range strikes. That was already the case in previous years, but Ukraine absolutely ensures that it gives itself the best chance to hit whatever it targets repeatedly, to the point where that target can't be recovered by Russia. This could be achieved through sheer drone volume during a strike or by sending a new wave of drones over if Ukraine feels the need. But either way, a refinery that is visited by Ukraine's flying sanctions can count on more than one. And if Ukraine's first drone manages to hit the target right off the bat, well, there are always those secondary and tertiary targets that can be taken out. What we are seeing here is the systematic dismantlement of Russia's entire oil and fuel industries, all supported by French and US intelligence. It's a combination of shock and technological pressure transplanted into the drone age. And as Ukraine's acting defense minister Yevheny Kamara notes, it's an approach that Ukraine can and should scale up to do as much damage to Russia's war machine on Putin's own turf as it can. Russia won't want that. It's dealing with enough problems at the current scale of Ukraine's strikes. Ukraine's attacks against Russian refineries in 2026 have been far more effective than those in 2025, sparking a fuel crisis that has spanned the entire country in the process. By the end of July, Russian fuel output had dropped up to 40% due to key refineries remaining offline. That's all due to Ukraine's increased precision. A strike in the previous years that may have taken a refinery offline for a few days now takes weeks or even months for Russia to recover from. Sales of gasoline have been restricted in over 40 of Russia's regions. Russian oil refining has dropped by 25% year-on-year, reaching a 20-year low, and gasoline production in the country has fallen by 17%, United 24 Media revealed in a July 2nd report. And as all of this is happening, Russia somehow has to find a way to deal with its domestic peak in fuel demand, which typically arrives between August and September. Combine Ukraine's drones with US and French intelligence and you get a lethal cocktail that is being forced down Russia's throat. But there's another ingredient added to that cocktail, a dash of Russian vodka that has been unwittingly provided by Russia itself by way of its former Soviet empire. What do we mean by that? Well, when speaking about Ukraine's strikes, Ukraine's former defense minister and now the chair of the Kyiv-based Center for Defense Strategies, Andriy Zagorodnyuk, says, "We think of Russia as a system. Understanding that system allows you to identify the critical parts where the effect is much more substantial. Shock the system by ripping out its heart and brain and the body crumbles. And beyond the Western intelligence, Ukraine knows exactly how to deliver these shocks because of Russia itself. Russia and Ukraine have very similar energy systems. Built using Soviet-era designs, those systems are still used in Ukraine. And due to that, Ukraine knows exactly what types of industrial processes Russia's refineries use, as well as their key operational vulnerabilities and equipment layouts. Ukraine only needs to look at its own energy infrastructure to see where it needs to hit inside Russia, which nodes need to be taken offline. And once the US and France get involved to add the what to the where, Russia ends up in the embarrassing position of being the architect of its own demise, based on the Soviet empire building that has inspired Putin. It's a dreadful sort of irony for Russia, as is the fact that Ukraine has learned from Russia during this war how damaging strikes against energy infrastructure can be. Sadly, we learn from Russians, Zagorodnyuk tells the Financial Times. They are doing exactly the same to us here, he adds. The key difference is that Ukraine can access what it needs from Western partners to carry out repairs and replace damaged equipment. Russia can't. It's stranded, isolated, and surrounded by a sea of sanctions that prevent it from getting its hands on the Western components that it needed to quickly repair the damage that Ukraine is doing. Russia is getting desperate. In a July 3rd report, Vladislav Vlasyuk, who is the Ukrainian president's advisor and representative on sanctions policy, told UKR Inform that Russia is now having to rely on China to get its hands on the components it's using. The problem, Vlasyuk says, is that Chinese knockoffs aren't reliable. The best example is navigation modules and certain high-precision microcontrollers. In a number of cases, the Russians have been forced to switch to alternative components that have inferior performance or require significant system redesigns. Our task is to make this process as difficult and expensive as possible, Vlasyuk stated. Something similar will be happening at Russia's refineries. That only plays into Ukraine's plan. A knockoff component that breaks easily can force redesigns, as we see in Russia's missiles, and it could even result in breakages that take refineries offline again. But Russia has no choice. It can pick crappy components or nothing at all, and it has to take the former. As for what happens next, it's only going to get worse for Russia from here. The flow of French and US intelligence isn't going to be curtailed, which means Ukraine's drones aren't going anywhere. Actually, that's not strictly accurate. They're going somewhere, and that somewhere is deeper into Russia than Putin ever thought possible. As Ukraine's drone technology gets better, it's able to strike deeper, which opens up more possibilities to leverage the Western intelligence it has to do more damage. Ukraine can now strike any target inside European Russia. Its best drones can travel over 3,000 kilometers, and it's working on a new generation of long-range sanctions that will strike even deeper. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky says that drones with ranges over 5,000 kilometers are on the table and may be available to Ukraine's operators by the end of 2026. In 2027, Ukraine will hope to have drones that can travel 10,000 kilometers. Yet more targets open up, which is very bad news for Russia. Ukraine isn't getting complacent either. Just as it built on its 2025 successes with a more refined strategy, pardon the pun, it's planning to build on what it's achieved so far during this year. Zelensky holds regular meetings with his top military officials to update target lists and outline new priorities. Toward the end of July, a new plan for deep strikes was approved, which saw Zelensky give the go-ahead for new strikes. Nobody outside of Ukraine's upper echelons knows what is going to be hit yet. That's by design. The less Russia knows, the less it can do about Ukraine's attacks before the drones come calling. If we were betting people, we'd gamble that most of the targets on Ukraine's list have been influenced by the intelligence that it's getting from France and the US. Russia can't defend against any of this anywhere near as well as it needs to. The country is so vast that it's impossible to defend every military critical site against Ukraine's drones. That size, which is such an asset when defending against ground invasions, has become a burden of the highest order for the Kremlin. Putin and his cronies must now constantly juggle air defenses. They have to guess what Ukraine might hit and move defenses to those targets, leaving other targets vulnerable as a result. It's a game of prioritization that Russia never thought it would be playing, and that game is going in Ukraine's favor. Now that Ukraine's drones can fly so far they can hit refineries in Siberia, Russia faces more of these choices. If the extended ranges that Zelensky talks about come to pass later in the year and into 2027, already stretched Russian defenses have to be pulled apart to breaking point. Distance is no longer a factor for Ukraine. Russia has no more strategic rear left. Only hundreds of targets, all within range or soon to be in the range of Ukraine's drones, remain. This is Russia's new reality. The CIA and French intelligence have united with Ukraine to wear away the Russian war machine. The ball breakers fly almost every day now. And every time they strike, be it against a crucial machine at a refinery or a military base that was supposed to be in a safe zone, Putin has to absorb another kick to his crotch. Eventually, Russia will be brought to its knees, a military superpower reduced to a trembling wreck, bleeding oil and fuel out of every orifice. Evidence of the brilliant collaboration between Ukraine and its French and American partners comes through every week. But it's in the Wildberries strikes that this combination of Western intelligence and Ukrainian firepower made real headlines in July. We touched on those strikes in this video. Now you can learn more about them and why they really matter by watching our video where we cover the scale of these strikes and how massive a blow they've struck against the Russian war machine. But before you go, remember to subscribe to The Military Show. We deliver analysis like this in all of our daily videos, and we would love to have you along for the ride. And thank you, as always, for watching.